Hello, and welcome to chapter 17 of the third treatise. And this chapter is called A Mistake in Learning. So, it brings up a very confusing issue. If God is perfection and we are a part of that, how do we make a mistake? This is a big conundrum that's been on my mind since I first started studying A Course in Miracles many, many years ago. And the quick answer is it wasn't really a mistake, but it appears to be a mistake. So let's look at it a little more deeply. We begin with the question, let's ask it. Why would you have chosen to obscure the truth? What would be the purpose of that? Since perfection can't make a mistake, there was a choice made. And verse 1 tells us, to express the self in physical form was a choice consistent with the laws of love. So love wanted the experience of expressing in physical form. And there were two kind of situations that had to happen in order for us to have that experience. One, we must have an observable form. And two, we must exist in relationship with others who have observable forms. Now, since there's only one, how can there be others? So we get to the point of the fact that if there's only one, how can one know itself on a deep level if there's nothing to reflect back to it? It's just one. There's only one. So it had to create the experience of more than one, of splitting, if you will, or separating, the illusion of separation, in order to see itself and know itself. And this is what evolution does, so that it can grow and expand in consciousness. And continuing then again with a little later in verse 1, this was simply so that expressions of love could be created and observed within the realm of physicality. So remember, all of this was done consistently with the laws of love. There is no mistake happening yet. Going into form and creating other forms that we could observe that were reflecting the Godhead was not a mistake, was not inconsistent with the laws of love. But then we had the whole fall thing, which the archetypes of Adam and Eve have been holding that experience for us visually for a long time. So the self, the individual being in form, judged what it observed as being other than itself. So instead of saying, oh, look at this other expression, this additional expression of my creation of what I am, the thought was, oh, that self is separate from this self. And that's where things started to switch. Again, keeping the broad perspective here, keeping without the judgment yourself of what happened. So this false idea of separation sprang from making distinctions between the self and all other things in creation. We created this mind that had this separate expression that started to believe in itself, basically. So names were assigned to enhance the distinctions. That's why in the Bible you hear the story about how Adam and Eve assigned names to the animals, because once you name something, that is a lion and I am not a lion. Now my sense of personal identity becomes clearer because I'm identifying what I am not. And it makes what I am become clearer and more separate. Verse 2, it was the beginning of perception and of the idea that what was observable was other than he who did the observing. So that's kind of where the thing split. Science is now beginning to understand the interconnectedness of all things. I love when science catches up to what's real. It's just further validation. So all of the experiments that they've done with water and with how what is observed changes, whether there's an observer there or not, all of the experiments that they're doing in quantum physics are just showing us that this is indeed true, that everything is connected. And now we move to the birth of a world in time. So if we were going to have this experience of being in form, we're infinite. So it couldn't go on indefinitely. We just wanted to have the experience and then be able to move on to another experience. So we needed a beginning and an end to the experience of being in form. So we had to create this world of time. We had to create birth and death and aging and all that goes with it. Verse 3, thus each self of form is born into time, and each self of form dies out of time. Both birth and death have always existed as choices, as beginnings and endings to the finite experience of time. That's why it's a natural thing, even though we try to avoid the whole idea of death. We really are very grateful for it on a bigger level, because it means that this limited, dense expression in form, as exciting and fun and challenging as it is, and as brave as we are to have taken it on, isn't going to be forever. The experience of existing within the realm of physicality was a new beginning, and it required a new thought system that was not needed before there was a physical form. Well, of course, if we're going to be in a world of time, which is an illusory context, as well as space being an illusion, we had to have a new thought system that would allow us to exist compatibly within that false experience of space and time. So the new thought system had to happen. Verse 5. So now here we were. Since the true self could not learn the untrue, the true self is going to wait, that's completely bogus. No. A new self, which we have called the ego self, was made. So we kind of had to make this other version within the true self. Notice it's encompassed by the true self. Since the ego self cannot learn the true, your true self had to be appealed to for this learning to take place. So the true self had to be on board with this, because the ego self is contained within the true self and was constructed with the agreement of the true self. In fact, your true self participated in this experiment. And number one, the experience was based upon the building block that God was separate from the self. Okay, so we had to have that experience. And two, it began a process of unlearning or forgetting the truth. These are the two things that were absolutely necessary in order to pull this deal off. We had to believe that God was separate from the self, and we had to forget the truth, because if we remembered it, we couldn't be all in. And as creative God beings, we are nothing if not all in. If we're going to do something, we're going to do it great, and that's exactly what we've done. So now what had to happen? So first we had the observable form. Then we had to have the new thought system that felt like we were separate. Now we had to include the role of the Holy Spirit in this whole gig. Because just like we needed a beginning and an ending, the personal self couldn't be completely cut off from source. Or we'd be miserable and we wouldn't find our way out. We would never get it. The whole experiment would never come to completion. So a communication and connection device was required in order to ensure a means of return to the true self. So I chose this image of these electrical wires because, or maybe they're telephone wires, not being mechanically minded. I don't know. But the idea is there. We maintained a connection, a communication with the true self via the Holy Spirit, which is just another part of yourself, a voice, an intuitive voice that was able to reach the personal self. Verse 6, but again, let me remind you that the Holy Spirit is not other than who you are, but an aspect of who you are and who God is. Names are but word symbols that represent what is. A Holy Spirit is called to return to your mind and heart. So just reminding you that, the Holy Spirit isn't some being outside of yourself that you depend on in your smallness. No, no, no. It's a part of yourself that you left there, kind of like breadcrumbs to lead you back to who you actually are, which is a powerful, loving, and amazing God and Goddess. What you think of as the Holy Spirit is not separate from you. However, as we go in verse 7, the time of the Holy Spirit is ended, and the time of the second coming of Christ is here. Why is that? People get afraid when they hear that. When I first heard that, I thought, what? I don't want the Holy Spirit to leave. But the truth is the Holy Spirit is that part of you that's just a connection, a trail to the true self. And you don't need that communication system any longer because you are now ready to embody the true self, literally embody the true self within your own physicality. So the time of illusion is now called to end. You don't need that lifeline anymore because you are stepping into your mastery. Verse 8, the return of Christ, or your ability and willingness to live as your true self, to live in the house of truth rather than the house of illusion, is what will end the time of illusion. Okay, your ability and willingness. Okay, you are able. I guarantee you, you're able. It's the willingness that is important for you to look at. The time of the Holy Spirit, or the time in which communication was needed between the illusion and the truth, must end in order for the truth to become the one reality. So it's time to give up your crutch of feeling like I'm just a frail little version of myself and I can depend on the Holy Spirit to tell me what's what and guide my way. And that is going to become increasingly uncomfortable to be that small self. It's like you've outgrown the cocoon and it's time to shed your skin and step into your mastery as the Christ.